Welcome to our Wednesday night Zoom with AJA. We'd like to welcome everybody who's taken the time to join us live on our Zoom tonight, everybody who's watching on our Facebook live right now, and to those of you who are listening tomorrow on J-Air to the replay. My name is Tennille, and I'm the Community Engagement Director at AJA. Tonight we have the privilege of welcoming Senator Sarah Henderson, the Shadow Minister for Education, Liberal Senator for Victoria, former lawyer and journalist. Tonight we will be discussing education off the rails, what can be done about the declining educational standards and concerning levels of activism in schools and universities. Before we kick off to Senator Henderson, I'd like to hand you over to our AJA President, Dr. David Adler, for a moment.
Thank you so much, Tennille, and special welcome to Senator Sarah Henderson, who's already become a friend of AJA. I just want to make one comment off topic, and that is not for the first time. There's been a bit of an attempt by a small radical leftist group to suggest that this event this evening should be cancelled. We don't fold to those sort of pressure, and Senator Henderson hasn't folded to that either. So I just wanted to put that out there that occasionally democracy can come out victorious. Senator Henderson, I'd like to welcome you and look forward to your words and an outline of your approach in formulating education policy.
Well, David, thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. It's really a great honour to join you. Thank you so much for your invitation. Can I start by saying I stand with you, as do the Coalition, every step of the way. There's no other way to say this other than we are absolutely horrified by the horrific level of anti-Semitism in our community following the 7th of October Hamas terrorist attack. And let's say, call it out for what it is. That's exactly what it is and was on that shocking day. So I've been really proud to be a member of the Coalition and to stand strongly with the Jewish community at this very, very difficult time. And as Shadow Minister for Education, within 48 hours of the Hamas attack, I wrote to the Education Minister, Jay Sinclair, along with the Universities Australia chair, Professor David Lloyd. And I actually wrote about the safety of Jewish students. I made a call to only raise concerns about Jewish students in schools and on university campuses because the evidence already was that Jewish students felt unsafe. And you may well be aware of the student survey that was conducted by the Jewish Students Association, and just having a look at some of the findings, they're pretty grim, and this was before the 7th of October. Almost 2/3 of Jewish students have experienced anti-Semitism at university. Over half of Jewish students have hidden their Jewish identity at university in order to avoid anti-Semitism. And 3/4 of Jewish students would be more confident about making complaints if their university adopted a definition of anti-Semitism. Now, they were the grim statistics before the 7th of October. So it was my judgment that following the 7th of October, Jewish students at university campuses in particular had very proper grounds to be concerned for their safety and for their well-being. So I didn't try to draw any sort of moral equivalence, as we have seen from some members of parliament. Whenever you raise issues of anti-Semitism, the response is, oh, we don't condone anti-Semitism or Islamophobia. And no, we weren't talking about Islamophobia. There was no evidence of Islamophobia in many issues that we've raised. We're only raising the concerns in relation to anti-Semitism. And I have continued since that day to raise deep concerns about the safety of Jewish students from Israel at university campuses. And we've seen many incidents of completely unacceptable behaviour, of hatred, of blatant anti-Semitism, of ridicule. I won't go through the list, other than to say this is absolutely not good enough. I do want to commend the universities which have adopted the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. And of course, Melbourne University is one of those institutions. However, it is of concern that students, even at universities where that definition has been adopted, have not felt that they have anywhere to go when they feel victimised, subjected to hatred, or blatant anti-Semitism. So I am very, very concerned about what we are seeing on university campuses. Deeply, deeply concerning. There is some incidents where universities have taken no action. A university academic who posted a flag which looked like a Hamas flag on his social media account. Another university academic which endorsed the conduct of Hamas. And what I'm deeply concerned about is, and this particular academic was at Monash University, and Monash gave a statement saying that they would investigate this matter, but they would only, that they recognised that this academic was making these comments in his private capacity. Now, that is just an absolute insult to our intelligence. It's like saying that I make comments in my private capacity. It is just unacceptable. So I have been deeply concerned about what is going on at universities, and I've also been deeply concerned about what is happening at our schools. And for me and for so many parents, Jewish or otherwise, there was horror throughout the cities of this country when school students were encouraged to protest, to join the pro-Palestinian protests, and to leave school, which is actually unlawful. That is completely unacceptable. And I spoke up very strongly about that and was obviously horrified to see some members of Parliament standing next to signs held by students with messages such, from the river to the sea, etc. And I also called out that behaviour. So we have a big job in our hands, because I think, and what is really concerning for me and for other members of the coalition, much of this behaviour is almost being normalised. It is not acceptable for any teacher to go into a classroom and start advocating for any cause, least of all a cause which arguably fuels anti-Semitism. And while I note that the Victorian Education Minister, Ben Carroll, has spoken out in relation to some of this conduct, I think, generally speaking, we haven't seen tough enough action. The one particular teacher where there was a lot of publicity was the Melbourne teacher from Paran Secondary School, who endorsed the conduct of Hamas, and it took many, many weeks before that teacher was stood down from his employment. We still don't know the outcome of that investigation, and we still don't know whether that person will keep his job. And I guess more broadly, I think the very first media release that I put out as the new Shadow Minister was headlined, "The classroom is for education, not indoctrination." And the coalition is really concerned about indoctrination in our educational institutions, not just in schools, not just in universities, but even in childcare centres. Some of the teachings that are happening in childcare centres are astonishing. A father wrote to me not so long ago and he said, I'm horrified that my 4-year-old they were down doing an excursion down at the beach, and my 4-year-old was told not to pick up a shell on the beach because it was stolen land and she would be part of stealing something that did not belong to her by picking up a shell on the beach. So there is so much lunacy and craziness that is seeping through our education institutions. I have to say most teachers do an amazing job. Most teachers are incredibly responsible. And I know many schools take this very, very seriously. But there are problems in our classrooms and there are certainly problems at our universities. And it's something, as I say, that the coalition takes very, very seriously. And even today I did an interview where I spoke about Monash University spending $127,000 on the former Vice-Chancellor's farewell party, a very lavish event for the top end of town. But I made the point, look, students go to university to be educated, and I have no problem about saying farewell to a member of staff, but spending that sort of money when every dollar matters. We want to make sure that we have a first-class education system, and it is a continual job to ensure that we do have a first-class education system. And I say that through the prism of the school standards and the decline in school standards that we have seen, particularly over the last 20 years. Unfortunately, there has been many fads underpinned by inquiry-based learning, project-based learning, where students are sort of told to wander off and explore the answer, rather than focusing on a knowledge-based curriculum. And that is really, really concerning. And so what we've seen now is 1 in 3 students have, in the last NAPLAN results, actually failed NAPLAN. And under the Program for International Student Assessment, would you believe that the average Year 10 student in Australia now is 1 year behind his or her learning compared to 20 years ago? And we've seen some very significant declines in school standards in maths, science, and in reading. And it's a pretty shocking state of affairs when 1 in 5 Year 7 students has the reading ability of a grade 4 student. So we've got a really, really big challenge. But unlike many other policy challenges, which are encountered whether you are in government or opposition, what's really positive about the policy challenge in education is we know what works. We know what is going to raise school standards, and it's evidence-based teaching and learning. It's a science of learning, science of reading. So not just the teaching of phonics, but explicit teaching in every respect. So what some might say going back to basics. And the schools which have adopted really a very strict program of explicit teaching are now seeing a very significant change in their results. So that is incredibly exciting. So I'll give you an example. 3 years ago, the Canberra-Goulburn Catholic education system moved to an explicit teaching structure in all of their schools, meaning focusing clearly on enriching their students with knowledge, teaching them what they need to know, revising what they need to know, and then testing what they've learnt, making sure that at every step of the way, when something is taught in any class, that light bulb moment goes off. I get it. Rather than just being allowed to sort of wander through the classroom and explore your feelings and explore your inquiry about some issue, when students haven't been enriched with basic knowledge. And the incredible thing that has happened in this school system, as it has in other schools, and their NAPLAN results have gone through the roof. So something like, compared to other schools, about 42% of students were underperforming on NAPLAN, and now it's something like about 4% in rough terms. So in 3 years, this school system has seen a remarkable change in their results, which is just so exciting. I have to say, my real inspiration is a wonderful primary school in Liverpool, in Sydney, Marsden Road Public School, led by an incredible principal, Manisha Gazula. And she's a traditional principal, no nonsense, get on with it. And she transformed her school about 5 years ago, introducing explicit teaching, and that includes the explicit teaching of behaviour, so that children know how to behave. They walk in lines into the library. They are told where to leave their shoes and their books. It's a strict regime, but it works. And the worst, perhaps the most negative experience that any child can have at school is not to learn. And so when you hear all these fads about, oh, we've got all this positive education lessons and we're going to do this and that for a child's well-being, the evidence shows that the best thing you can do for a child's well-being is to make sure that they learn. Because if a child falls behind, that's disenfranchising. They feel isolated. They don't feel part of their group. And then, of course, that then goes from bad to worse. And Marsden Road Primary School has seen the most incredible lift in its NAPLAN results. And the incredible thing about this school, it's a low SES school. Many of the families are from disadvantaged parts of Sydney. 90% of the children are from non-English speaking families, and many of them are from refugee families. So it is just unbelievable and so exciting to see what can be achieved in our schools. So look, I think having a look at the time, I'm David. I guess that's a number of observations, but very keen to open up the discussion and also to address any issues that are of interest or concern, or any other issues perhaps that I haven't touched on.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That's a tinge of optimism there when we see so much negativity in discussion about the education system and decline in standards. There are a couple of specific subjects I'd like you to comment on if you can.
Yep.
It would be remiss not to mention faith-based schools.
Mm-hmm.
And there seems to be a tension at the moment as to whether faith-based schools should be able to have the freedom to, subject to the curriculum, to manage the school as they see fit, including, for example, employing teachers with an ethos consistent with the school ethos. What's the Coalition's perspective on faith-based schools?
Well, David, first of all, we are very concerned about the government's ALRC, the Australian Law Reform Commission, interim report into its investigation or examination of possible changes to the laws that govern faith-based schools, particularly the Sex Discrimination Act. So currently there is an exemption in the Act which allows faith-based schools to, if you like, positively discriminate, for want of a better word, but particularly enabling faith-based schools of any religion to select staff consistent with their ethos and beliefs.
Exactly.
Now, we strongly believe that faith-based schools must have the ability to do so. And regrettably, in the government's ALRC report released last year, and we are waiting for the final report to release. It was handed to the Attorney General in December, and we have seen no sign of it, and we are concerned. That initial report flagged the notion that faith-based schools should not have the ability to self-preference staff based on their attributes and the tenets and beliefs of the school. And that opens up really, that fundamentally undermines faith-based schools, because if religious schools cannot select their own staff consistent with their beliefs and tenets of their religion, that undermines the very basis of the school. And what I'm also really concerned about, while it may be the case that some teachers who are employed, if there was to be a change in the law, may not do anything which would offend a particular school, it's really concerning for me, because I think it opens the door to activists. It opens the door to activists to apply for a job, to infiltrate themselves into a religious school, and then, frankly, to cause mayhem. Mm. Now, that's the worst case scenario. So we are really very concerned about where this is heading. Religious freedom is fundamental to our society, fundamental to our nation, and we are holding on with bated breath to see what the government says about this. David, can I also comment in relation to the Productivity Commission recommendation released late last year in relation to deductible gift recipient status? So more than 5,000 schools in this country have DGR status, mainly through school building funds, but also through library funds. And that enables, of course, schools to take donations from their own community to build the infrastructure, to maintain the infrastructure they need to ensure that they can provide and offer the very best education to their students. Alarmingly, the Productivity Commission has made a recommendation on an interim basis that the DGR status for school building funds and other religious charities should be abolished. Now, this would have a very devastating impact on Catholic schools, which would cost Catholic schools about $2 billion a year, and it would cost independent and other religious schools over $1 billion a year. And so this is another area where we are very concerned about the way in which the government appears to be targeting non-government schools. I mean, the coalition strongly believes in choice, the choice of students and the choice of parents. I mean, that is fundamental to our education system. And we are really concerned that that choice is being eroded by this government. And even in relation to an announcement by the government last year that it would be providing a $50 million investment for teacher scholarships. So we have a teacher shortage crisis in this country. We've been raising the alarm bells about this. The government announced a scholarship program, which we thought was a good idea and we supported. And when the details were announced, lo and behold, those teacher scholarships worth $4,000 or so per teacher, so very significant. We learned that they were only available to teachers going into government schools. So that is 1/3 of all teachers who are now being denied the opportunity to apply for a teaching scholarship because, they are planning to go into a non-government school. And of course, that also targets religious schools. So, as I say, David, we are very concerned about the way in which this government appears to be attacking non-government schools, but certainly the attack on religious freedom and the attack on DGR status, which the government has not ruled out. It's made some sort of, a few whispers that, oh no, that's not our current policy, which I believe are weasel words. We've invited the Education Minister to rule this out, that this proposal will never see the light of day, and we have heard nothing but silence from the government. So on a number of fronts, we are very concerned, and we share your concerns.
Let me shift you on to a subset of political activism which has occurred in schools. And we're all Australian, but there seems to be an undermining of Australia. I don't know if there's a biased form of history being taught. You spoke about the seashell being stolen from stolen land or something like that, but it's widespread. I mean, gone are the days when a school assembly would raise the Australian flag and sing the national anthem. I mean, but we've gone way past that. So Australia Day becomes Invasion Day. Australian history is something to be ashamed of. Can you comment on the undermining of Australia and whether through the education system that can be turned around at all?
Well, David, this is a very insidious, because it's not necessarily evident what is happening in classrooms, and it's not always evident to parents. And as I say, and I go back to what I said at the very beginning, most teachers do a first-class job in our country. They work very hard. They have a very big responsibility. They love their job, and they love inspiring young Australians to be their very best. But there is a creeping degree of activism in our schools. There is no doubt about it. And unfortunately, it is underpinned by our national curriculum, which requires that every subject is taught through the prism of what they call cross-curricular priorities. So every subject needs to be taught through the prism of indigeneity, through the eyes of Asia, and under the theme of sustainability. And so I would ask you, if you are teaching advanced maths or teaching science or English, why can't teachers just focus on the subject matter rather than trying to weave their teaching through the prism of those three overarching themes? To me, it's not appropriate. But look, there are certainly many individual stories that I am hearing all the time of students being taught that we should be ashamed of our history, references to Invasion Day, ongoing references to stolen land. And look, I think it's fair to say, I mean, we've got some dark parts of our history, and students should learn the dark parts of our history, including what happened to Aboriginal Australians. But first of all, it's got to be age appropriate. So you don't tell a 4-year-old to be ashamed of their country. I mean, that just is confusing and distressing. And in teaching students about Australian history, we need to teach students about all aspects of our history, the many wonderful parts of our history, how it was formed, and the contribution that we have all made to this country following 1788. And so I think it is concerning, but again, I want to end on a positive note. There are so many schools doing an incredible job in this respect. I went to Ballarat, a Clarendon College, which is one of the best schools in Victoria, and they have a very strong explicit instruction focus. They've basically rewritten the curriculum. So they work within the national curriculum, but they have a very, very strong curriculum, which is tried and tested year in, year out. I mean, some of the techniques that they are using to improve their teaching are just mind-boggling. It's so exciting to see what some schools are doing. So when we talk about this, unfortunately, and I'd like to think that this is very much a minority of teachers who are engaging in this sort of teaching, but it is happening and it needs to stop.
Well, I can see we've got a lot of questions, so I'll just do our 1 minute promo, and then we'll move on to questions. Hopefully I'll bring up the right document. Let me see if that's the right one. No, it's not. We might move on to questions while I find the right document.
While David's finding that, I'll just update everyone on an exciting development. So we've been working with the Teachers Professional Association of Australia, which is a relatively new union that started up to challenge some of these activist unions, and particularly they've said they'll particularly help out when it comes to combating anti-Semitism, and they're a union that is not getting involved in these some of the pro-Palestinian things the other unions are. So, yeah, it's an exciting project we're working on with them.
I've got it now. All right. So very briefly, as we do each week, at the end of the event, please make sure that you go to the website jewishassociation.org.au, where you can sign up to the email list, make a donation, make sure you're following our social media, and I'll show you an aspect of that in a second. Next week, we have a focus on Judeo-Christian values, which we've been touching on, and the fight against anti-Semitism, with Mark Leach, who's been the driving force of the Never Again is Now rallies, which are occurring around the country. And as you can maybe see from the picture, he and I shared a segment with Shari Markson recently on Sky News, which was really good. And you can see the video on our YouTube channel. But speaking of social media, I just wanted to show our group this. The massive reach that AJA is getting, and the last 3 months have been in the millions on Twitter, as you can see there, December, January, February, sort of from 2.35 in January up to 3.78 million in February, just finished. And I believe no other Jewish organisation is remotely anywhere near that, and would be lucky to get 10% of our reach. So opening to questions. Courtney, would you like to be first? And please, you can unmute and ask your question.
Sure, thank you. Senator Henderson, I really appreciate all the things you had to say about education. It sort of reinforces a lot of parents' experiences, especially when we're talking about school performance. And then just from my experience as a mom of 2 school-age children and one in early childhood education, who I had to move him because of a big pro lifestyle day at the for my 1-year-old, let's just say that. I think there's a vector here in the schools, and from my experience, even if you have a teacher who is so dedicated to classical teaching, there's this module of like one of the modules for social emotional learning is a 156-page document that I've been through.
Courtney, you're going to have to get to your question.
Yeah, so my question is, each subject in this social emotional learning is a power struggle. And it could be a power struggle over gender, over lifestyle, over indigenous. So these children are sort of being programmed in this power struggle. And I just see this as like a cancer, okay, that's just growing in toxicity and size. Is this at all is SEL and the effects of it at all on the radar of the coalition to target as a performance, as something that's affecting performance in the schools?
Look, I think one of the really complex parts of this indoctrination issue is the insidious nature of it. And so, of course, the states and territories run schools. Schools are not run by the Commonwealth. And so the Commonwealth is principally responsible for funding, partnering obviously with the states and territories, but also the principal funder of non-government schools. And so we have certain levers to pull, but it would be very ambitious of me to say that we have serious levers when it comes to the day-to-day operations of schools. So again, this goes back to, those cross-curricular priorities. When you have that embedded in our national curriculum, it almost sort of opens a door that everything should be taught through that prism. And I'm, as I say, I really do question that. But I think any sort of teaching that teachers gives students the wrong facts, that, many times that issue of the oppressed versus the oppressor seems to be a theme in a number of the teachings. And I just want to go back to, and I'm just having a look at something that I put out, and this is on my website, which is sarahhenderson.com.au. Last November, in condemning the Australian Education Union for the teachers and school staff for Palestine Week of Action, which was encouraging government schools to invite activists into the classroom, I very clearly said the Victorian Institute of Teaching's Code of Conduct requires teachers to maintain objectivity and prohibits them from displaying bias or preference in their interactions with students. So there is actually a very strong code of conduct. Now, even the Labor Education Minister in Victoria, Ben Carroll, when this was going on, he also reiterated this code of conduct. And I have to say on this issue, he was quite good. I mean, the bottom line is that teachers hold a very privileged position in our community and in our society. And so we've really got to call this out. And I certainly called it out in relation to this shocking activism, this pro-Palestinian activism, which was happening late last year, and I'm sure which continues to happen. But look, in terms of addressing the details of what's happening with one class in one school, I'd really welcome the details, but unfortunately, it's a bit like red tape. When you say we're going to combat red tape, you need to know, well, what's the regulation, what's the barrier, and how do we fix it one by one? And it is a very big challenge. I have to say I attended a talk by the former inspector of schools in the UK, and she was, they have an inspectorate system in the UK, and I'm not suggesting that it's just about this issue. It's about standards, it's about well-being. There's a whole lot of different parameters on which schools are judged, but it has been a very, very successful model, one that would be much more challenging in our country because we are a federation. The Commonwealth doesn't have the same ability to go into schools, but it is an example of how standards can increase when you have someone watching you and checking on you and calling on you and just making sure that a school is not just ticking all the boxes, but doing that deep dive into how they're teaching, what they're teaching, to ensure that students have the very best education. So it is quite inspiring to see what is happening in the UK.
Okay. I should have said, just as a reminder, please keep the questions as brief as possible. Alan, would you like to go next? Alan, you need to unmute.
Yeah. Thanks, David. Senator, we seem to be stuck in a cycle of a woke curriculum producing woke kids who go on to be woke teachers, who then produce the next generation of woke kids, and so on. How are we ever going to break this vicious cycle?
Well, our universities have got a lot to be responsible for, because what we have found, and I have to commend Alan Tudge, the former Education Minister, who did an enormous amount of work in this regard. Generally speaking, our universities have really let down student teachers. And the IPA did some very, very good work recently, and there's been a number of studies, but the IPA released a very, very good study looking and doing a deep dive into university teaching courses. And it found that so much of a course was infused with activism, with social causes, with woke agendas, rather than with the foundations of education, which frankly are numeracy and literacy, the foundations of a knowledge-rich curriculum. And so as a result, there's been an enormous amount of work done to improve teacher training by our former government. Much of that work was adopted by this government, and now universities are being required to adhere to a core curriculum. So they no longer will be able to just go off on a folly of their own. And in fact, I know some universities are quite concerned about the standard of their teacher training. And one in particular said to me, look, we're not going to wait. We're just going to run our own investigation and work out where we're going wrong. There are a couple of really good teaching courses where they're doing exceptional work. And I do say that La Trobe University is a standout for their teaching courses. But the universities have got a lot to be responsible for when it comes to teachers who go into classrooms who are unprepared, who do not have the foundations. And then, of course, we are one of the worst countries in the world when it comes to classroom disruption. I think we're number 71 out of 80 OECD countries. And that's because our student teachers are not being taught how to manage a classroom, how to explicitly teach behaviour. So we are not doing our student teachers any favours at all. There's a strong recognition of that, but it's very, very urgent to fix.
Is that Bella Debrera at IPA you're talking about, or someone else?
Sorry, David?
Was it Bella Debrera who did that study?
Yes, I think it was, yes. And Colleen Harkin too was very involved.
Yeah, she's also been a guest at one of our events. Good friend. Okay, Dennis Max, do you want to have your question, please?
Thank you very much, Senator Henderson. I am very concerned about student activism. I have 2 grandchildren in school, which concerns me. If a teacher in a school were an activist white supremacist and said awful things about people of coloured race or of Aboriginals or of Sudanese immigrants, what action do you think a state, and I know you're federal, a state government would take against such a teacher? And why are not the same principles applied when Jewish students at state schools are put at risk?
I don't know, other than I am horrified that the same standards do not apply, Dennis. As I mentioned before, the case of the teacher at the Melbourne Secondary School who was effectively endorsing the conduct of Hamas, and it took many, many weeks before he was stood down, and now he may well keep his job. But frankly, and I have to say, I'm so delighted to hear about the new union that's been formed, the Teachers Professional Association of Australia, I think it is, because these unions are rabid. The union activism, the damage they are causing. And in fact, the head of the Australian Education Union appeared before the Cost of Living Committee inquiry, and I attended that particular inquiry hearing in Brisbane. This has been chaired by Senator Jane Hume. And I was asking about the importance of evidence-based teaching. And she didn't want to answer the question. And I said to her, well, it's really important that, you know, you address this, because this is one of the reforms that even the government is trying to introduce, which is contingent on funding. So if you're talking about funding, let's talk about reforms. And the Australian Education Union's position is, well, there's lots of evidence this doesn't work, and this could be even quite dangerous or very negative for students, which is just completely and utterly wrong. And what I mean, I just pull my hair out in despair when any education union does not, I mean, it's just extraordinary, does not focus on the fundamentals of education, They seem to be so concerned about getting more teachers into classrooms, building their numbers rather than looking at outcomes. And frankly, a lot of teachers are being let down by their unions because teachers expect the very best tools in the classroom. And one of the things that I've continued to call for is we need to give teachers greater support. How can we expect teachers to excel in the classroom if they haven't had the best teacher training and if they don't have the best teaching tools to support their students to be the best they can be? And so I think these unions have got a lot to answer for. I am, really disgusted in some of the conduct of the unions over recent months, particularly in relation to the activism. It's absolutely appalling. And I think government, state and federal have got to do much more to stamp this out.
Agreed.
And I can see your question in the chat, which I think is one on the backs of a number of people's minds. I'll pick it up from there. And it concerns gender ideology. We have seen reports of and anecdotal examples of radical gender teaching from very young, and referring to a matter at RMIT in Melbourne. But what's the role of the education system in gender and the activism that's occurred there, with the spike in the number of kids going through transition? There seems to be a whole subset of activism concerning gender.
David, there is. And I would start by saying that I think most schools do a really good job. And I've addressed this issue with a number of religious schools because, of course, they've been targeted with accusations that these are the types of students that they want to discriminate against. But the evidence is contrary to that. In the vast majority of cases, I've seen schools do an amazing job when their students, are wanting to be trans or have complexities in relation to their gender. But I think what most parents don't want to see is this sort of gender activism being fueled in our schools. And I reflect on, there's a recent case involving a school in Victoria, which is a boarding school. It's probably quite easy to identify. And they made the decision to put a trans boy into the same unit of girls in a boarding school environment. And I have to say the parent group is absolutely outraged. I mean, schools generally do a really good job, but this was a bridge too far for many parents. And what I think really concerned parents is that the school said, look, under the Victorian, whatever the regulations are, we are required to pay particular attention to the needs of trans students and, LGBTI other students. But I would say, well, isn't your obligation to treat all students the same, in that the needs of all students are important? And so for parents who were caught up at that school with this situation, they were saying, well, look, that's fine. We don't have an issue with you taking care of this particular one student, but we also expect that you will care for the well-being and the dignity of the girls in this unit as well. And, we think that their dignity and privacy really matters. So I think there have been a number of cases, David, where schools have made poor judgments. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I attended a rally at the Clifton Springs Primary School a number of months ago when a parent group was outraged because the school decided to introduce gender-neutral toilets. So there was no longer a place where girls could go to the toilets and have separate facilities. And that really concerned a lot of parents. And now there's been some resolution of that matter because they've opened an old older facilities. But again, I made the point, this is all well and good, but what about the privacy and dignity of those students? And particularly for girls and for boys, frankly, who are entitled to have their own private spaces without making things tougher for them than they already are. For a lot of kids, particularly girls, during puberty, I mean, those sorts of circumstances are very challenging. So as I say, I think most schools do a really good job on this issue, but again, we have seen some concerning examples where that is not occurring.
I'm going to try to get through a couple of quick questions before we run out of time. Someone who hasn't asked a question, but I know well, Professor Matthew Ogilvie, if you'd like to unmute and ask yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. David, and thank you very much, Senator Henderson. Not a question, I apologise for that, but just a very quick observation, which is the connection of these issues. I was at a university, not mine, not the university at which I teach, saw some feminists wearing rainbow hijabs. And I asked them, why are you doing that? And they said, it's to support Palestine. And it struck me that these people who were absolutely certain there were at least at the time 58 different genders that you could change at will could not answer a simple question, which river, which sea? So God forbid I should have asked them about the history of the Holy Land. So I think that Lenin referred to useful idiots. Well, unfortunately, the education system is it's forming the people or deforming the people who are open to this sort of nonsense. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Professor, can I just respond to that? I mentioned before that I was concerned about the lack of enforceability by universities when there were complaints of anti-Semitism. One of the things that we prosecuted very heavily, and I'm very pleased the government has now taken this up, is an independent student ombudsman. Now, that is now going to be introduced, which is an independent mechanism for students to take their complaints for independent consideration and remedy when a university does not properly manage or resolve a complaint. So I think that the student ombudsman presents students at universities, not necessarily academic staff, but at least for students, a good opportunity to go to an independent ombudsman and say, I made a complaint, this is unacceptable, nothing was done, and I expect justice. So whether it's student safety or whether it's deficient courses and refunds should be given for deficient courses, I think that the student ombudsman potentially there is a very good opportunity to provide much greater accountability than we are seeing at universities at the moment. I have to say, some of the stuff on campuses at the moment is completely rabid. Now, even the Vice-Chancellor of Melbourne University, I saw a video posted online where he was being hounded. He was being pursued through the university grounds, being recorded, harassed, harangued, absolutely outrageous conduct. And I do think the universities have got to crack down on this behaviour. So in the case of Sydney University, I wrote to the Vice-Chancellor, Mark Scott. There was the BDS movement. There were meetings being held in the law faculty. University facilities were being used. And I wrote to the Vice-Chancellor and said, on what basis are you allowing taxpayer-funded facilities to be used for these purposes? It's not appropriate. It's not part of the education of students. And at the very least, universities should not be lending a hand in supporting this sort of activism. So, in short, there is a lot more that the universities can and must do. I do appreciate that they are also walking on eggshells. It's a bit of a tinderbox at some universities. So I do appreciate the difficulty, but I'm very strongly of the view that universities can do a lot more to ensure that all students feel safe, including, of course, Jewish students.
And we try to squeeze in one more question. Greg Hearn, can you unmute, please?
Good on you. Hello, Sarah. The Victorian Education Department were approached about education and research on blasphemy and anti-Semitism. And they said that they've got high-end links with the Islamic Council of Australia, and they would not entertain a second opinion from the non-Muslim perspective because it would jeopardise their relationship. How do you feel about that?
Look, my first reaction is I would really like to know more about that. I mean, that is, if that is the position of the department, I've not heard that before, then that is deeply concerning. I mean, frankly, the department should not be aligned with any particular group. They should be ensuring that students get a proper education, including on religion, including in relation to anti-Semitism, discrimination, in the context of their normal school subjects and in an age-appropriate way. So I guess I'd really like to learn more about that. And if you could provide more information offline, I'd be really grateful. I would be very happy to investigate that.
Okay. Tennealle, do you want to?
David, I just saw, and look, I've only got my iPhone, so I'm sorry. I just saw a comment that came up online saying the Libs were in power for 10 years. I only saw the first part of it. And look, I want to just respond to that and say it's a really good point. And I'm not walking away from the fact that there's still a big job to do. And so where we haven't always got things right in the past, I don't make any excuses for that. You know, we did a lot of really important work when we were in government, particularly in relation to the curriculum and in relation to teacher training, in relation to returning and ensuring that the teaching of phonics was embedded in the curriculum, and that we return to a back to basics education, a stronger focus on literacy and numeracy. But I don't turn my back on the fact that there is a greater challenge. And all I want to share with you is I'm up for the challenge. There is a lot more work to be done. I'm really determined that we're going to do everything, of course, we can to be elected at the next federal election. And I'm really determined, hoping that if I am the next Shadow Minister for Education, that we are going to make some very significant changes in our schools. We are going to have to drive the reform, because if we have a knowledge-rich curriculum where we respect our history, where we respect the facts and the truth, then that is going to really assist teachers to return to the fundamentals of education. And frankly, that's what matters.
Well, I'm glad you picked up that point, because it's a theme we hear across a range of portfolios, Sarah, and to be honest, a number of people we associate with were not entirely enthralled with the performance of the previous Liberal government. I mean, we see just in the last day or two that Peter Dutton has announced that nuclear energy will be part of an energy policy going forward. Outstanding. That's a differentiation. We also think that there's a great opportunity to make a very clear differentiation on Middle East policy. There are a whole range of things that this Labor government has moved very hard to the left and very hostile to Israel. But your responsibility is education, and if you're prepared to take the bit between your teeth and actually come up with the policies that will address some of the issues, all strength to your arm.
Thank you so much, David.
Tennealle, you there to close off?
Hi, everybody. Senator Henderson, on behalf of all of us at the AJA and everybody who's joined us this evening, we would like to wish you the greatest thank you for joining us. We can definitely see you are up for the challenge. And everybody who is online here tonight, we support you, and we can see that there is this great need for improvement in our education system. So we really thank you for spending your time, for educating us this evening, and all we can hope for is that this will improve in the future. We'd like to remind everybody that this was recorded. The recording will be available on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook. So please share this with your friends and family, share the message out. You'll find the links, easy to share. And we hope everybody will join us next week with Mark Leach at 8 p.m. on Zoom. Thank you, everybody, and good evening.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Tennille, and thank you, David. It's been a great pleasure.